Well, folks, thanks very much. I'm Tom, an alcoholic. I told some folks at dinner that I wouldn't make but a 20-minute talk, but it seemed like it'd take an hour and a half to do it. Won't seem like it, but I'll be talking as fast as I can. That's a little bit of a chore. Delighted to be here. I'm really pleased to be here. And what a beautiful, beautiful place. When I was trying to get lined up to come, I told the travel agent where I was going, and I swear to God, I don't know how you guys ever got here. This is a very, they fly a lot of planes in here, but they want you to buy the plane. So this was an interesting trip. I thought I was going to a logging camp somewhere. I said, good God. And then I get here and what a nice place, what a nice city, and a nice conference. I've thoroughly enjoyed this. And looking forward to seeing a lot of old friends. I got a lot of old buddies and friends in this crowd, and especially pleased to see some folks that I don't know. I'm always pleased when I see folks I don't know. I was thinking, Kathy was talking about the glamour. Talk about an oxymoron, a glamorous job in H&I. I guess that's what I'm looking for. That's why I'm still here. I'm a member of the Big Book group in Southern Pines, North Carolina, and my sobriety date is February 2nd of '57, and thank you very much. If anybody had ever been able to convincingly tell me that I would stay sober this long, I'd have probably quit before I started. Yeah, I wasn't really thrilled with the notion of being a lifelong member of Alcoholics Anonymous. I wasn't even thrilled about being a member. We can talk about that a little as we go along. But I am delighted to be here. Some of us in this room were together last week at another conference down in the southern end of the state, and talking about that glamorous job in H&I. I think we had 4,470 people, as I recall, is what that counted up to be. I've noticed that there's a phenomenon in Alcoholics Anonymous that just sort of defies imagination in a way. The closer you get to the work, the smaller the crowd. Now, this ain't bad tonight. I mean, there's a bunch of us in here, particularly when you consider the agenda for this meeting. And take a look around when you start to trudge that road of happy destiny, carrying the message to those places that don't seem glamorous in the beginning, but truly have been the place where some of the most deeply rewarding experiences that I could possibly imagine have originated. And so ours is a special kind of work. I go to a lot of meetings in a lot of places. There's none that means more to me than this group here. I don't mean just this group, but the group that we represent, and that's the folks who are committed not only to service, but to one of the most demanding, challenging areas of service. And while that's true, it is also true what I just said earlier, that unlike some of the popular opinion would have you believe, I believe that correctional work, institutional work, has as much potential as any place I know. And when I look back over my experience in Alcoholics Anonymous, I work with all kinds of people from all kinds of places. And I don't know of any single place that would compare with the work that I've been privileged to participate in corrections. And I don't mean just in terms of quality of experience, in terms of what it's meant to me, but in terms of people that I've been able to participate with finding long-term lasting sobriety. I don't know of any other single point of contact where I've enjoyed seeing more people come into Alcoholics Anonymous and stay to enjoy a brand new way to live than in corrections. So I'm not somebody who thinks that this is the fellowship of the lost cause. I think it's one of the most viable places to do to do 12-step work of any place I know. And so I'm awfully glad to be a part of that. You know, I used to think that, I don't know exactly where this will go tonight. I'm sure I want to talk a whole bunch about drinking and puking and stuff like that. All of the wonderful stuff, you know. I'm a great lover of drunkalogs. I love drunkalogs. Especially mine. My God, I could talk about that sucker all night. Old Bill was kind of partial to him, too. 1/4 of our book is made up of the hopelessness of the condition. And so I'm somebody that loves drunkalog, but I'll try to withhold the pleasure a little bit tonight if as much as I can. And maybe just sort of kind of jump into, or ultimately lead into about 10:30 or 11 o'clock with some of the work that we share together. When I first came in the program, and for a good while, I truly believed that my experience was, if not unique, very rare. Yeah, I didn't think that my story, my alcoholism, my recovery matched up very well with very many people. But the longer I've stayed, the more I've changed my mind about that. And today I consider myself just a garden variety drunk with a garden variety experience. I imagine I started in Alcoholics Anonymous very much like most everybody in this room. I found myself one day sitting in a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. Never planned to be there. I never met anybody that planned to be there. Never met anybody that said my ambition was to be a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. Never seen it in a yearbook. Masons, Moose, VFW, ain't never seen an aspirant to Alcoholics Anonymous. As I found myself, like most people that I've met, one day sitting in a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. Didn't believe I was an alcoholic. I had been drunk most of my life, but I didn't believe I was an alcoholic. The one thing I learned was that being drunk teaches you absolutely nothing about alcoholism. Now, I was stone dumb about alcoholism when I got here. It didn't take too long to figure out what the purpose of the meeting was. I mean, these folks were about not drinking. And they were serious as a heart attack. Man, I mean, they were serious. They're talking about not drinking forever. Forever. Good God. I couldn't imagine staying sober a full day on purpose. And these folks talking about being sober forever. I was 24 years old. According to insurance companies, if you can believe anything they say, I had a good chance of living 50 more years. Holy cow. What a prospect. Going to be bone dry for the rest of my life. I never seen anybody sober that I would like to be like. Nobody. I never seen anybody sober didn't look like they were in pain. Just the most gruesome condition that I thought a human could endure. So here I'm going to be, if I'm lucky, quote, I got 50 years of joy to live. Holy cow. I always wonder, what do people do who don't drink? I never did anything enjoyable in my life. I mean, nothing that didn't involve booze. Nothing. I didn't fish, hunt, drive, walk, make love, nothing. Sober. I didn't even, I always wondered why people look so bad that didn't drink. I just figured that not drinking and no fun were hand in glove. And I tell you, I won't go too far with this because it gets worse than drinking and puking. Because I don't know about you, but there's a strange kind of thing happens when we get sober. We go through, men, I don't know what women do, but men go through a relatively brief period of, face it, they just have trouble getting physically, shoot. You know, they can't get it up is what I'm talking about. That's Now it is fleeting in nature, thank God. And I'm here to tell you that when it comes back, it can last at least 40 more years. But I mean, that's a bit of concern, you know. But when I'm sitting in my early days in Alcoholics Anonymous, thinking about a thrilling life of 50 years dry, and those kind of thoughts come to mind after you quit puking. They just sort of come. And I always wondered, what on earth do people do? I mean, y'all probably didn't worry about this, but how do you deal with sex sober? Sober. I never had been real cozy with a lady sober in my life since I was a child. I wasn't even sure I could. I wonder, where do you get a girlfriend sober? Go down to Baptist church and hit on somebody, I reckon. I mean, that's a troubling thing. And that was kind of the thoughts going through my mind as I'm sitting there, a fledgling member of Alcoholics Anonymous in the making. And you can well imagine I had some mixed feelings. You know, on the one hand, that sounded pretty good, and on the other hand, it sounded god-awful bad. I mean, it sounded bad. Bone dry, I'm going to be pure, will never smile again. God knows. And I tell you now, I noticed there's some kind of new, you know, if these are real worries to you, you might ought to get out while you can. You got to, cause I tell you, most of the fears come true. I mean, I don't do nothing, hardly. I don't even cuss much, you know. We're talking at dinner. I don't even smoke. I'm from North Carolina and don't smoke. They're going to ban me to California or something like that. Don't chase women. I'm able, but I'm married. And I understand what being married means now. Well, I mean, those were very real thoughts in my mind as I sat there in Alcoholics Anonymous looking at my future. Now, I didn't have any real immediate concern about the sex issue. Well, none that I wanted to address because I was in jail at the time. And I mean, I had concerns way out yonder in the future somewhere, but nothing I wanted to fix right then. I wasn't sure which end of the fixing I would be on. And so, yeah, I was, yeah, when I say I I'm not too sure I would have stayed if I'd have really understood all this. That's who it was. Now, you know, I was exactly that way. And I don't think that made me a candidate of the year in Alcoholics Anonymous in 1957. But thank God I stayed long enough for those kinds of things to clear up. You know, when I think about that, I think about how unlikely my becoming a long-term recovering member in Alcoholics Anonymous, how remote that possibility really is. It just boggles my mind. When I add to that the situation I was in, I was in a maximum custody penitentiary. I was serving a sentence of max of 15 years, and I was serving that sentence for a crime that I have absolutely no recollection of committing then, now, or ever. But a crime that I know full well that I did commit in a drunken blackout. And I could be real nice to myself and say that it was an unavoidable accident. The fact of the business is I just don't know. You know, all I know, and I take full, absolute responsibility, all I know is that 2 young folks died just because they happened to be trying to cross the street that I was driving blind drunk down the middle of in the city of Flint, Michigan. So not only was I under the barriers of ignorance and resistance and all of that, but I was also living under, as you can well imagine, a veritable mountain of guilt. A mountain of guilt. I've heard many people say they were ashamed to be in Alcoholics Anonymous, and so was I. But not ashamed because I thought I was too good, but ashamed because I was too bad. I felt deeply and utterly ashamed to be breathing, when 2 young folks no longer were because of me. And I guarantee you, it takes a long time, if ever, to balance the scales between a street drunk and 2 fine young folks with their lives in front of them. Well, obviously you don't. And so when I think about that, it simply underlines the power that exists in this program to reach in and get hold of a torn up life and give it a whole new purpose and a whole new direction. And that's what I want to share tonight, is what brought that about, and you know, what was the power that got through, and what was it that made the change come. Mine's not to analyze, it's just a report. And I want to tell you what happened. Yeah, I think I am a very typical garden variety type of drunk. It's a strange thing. I was in AA for almost 2 years before I ever heard one single speaker with whom I identified. Almost 2 years. Now I identify with practically everybody that I hear. Now I think it's a better grade of drunks these days or something. I think what it is, is that I found out the important difference between identifying and comparing. Identifying and comparing. As long as I was trying to compare my story to others, I always came up short. Because as you can imagine, 40 years ago, I was a fairly young member in Alcoholics Anonymous. I was the youngest guy in my group that I went into in that institution. I was the youngest guy in my state for a while in North Carolina. So that is an extremely awkward kind of a place. So I think I am a garden variety type of guy. I'm very much like everybody I've ever heard. I've always had that kind of either an inability or an unwillingness to live in life as it was. I didn't like who I was. I didn't like where I was. Didn't like how I felt. I didn't like anything about my circumstances, and I just wouldn't accept it. Yeah, I was always a rebellious kind of somebody that just simply wouldn't take his place in life. You know, my sister and I obviously were born in the same place, lived with the same family, ate the same food, went to the same school, went to the same church. Totally different result. You know, she still lives in the same community. She still worked in the same place that my family worked. She's been active in church all of her life. She's been a very peaceful and productive citizen. Even though it was exactly the same genetic tree, mine was totally different. I just simply couldn't deal there. I didn't have the discipline and resolve to stay there and take my cards as they were dealt with me. And so I just started rebelling early on. Yeah, and I rebelled in every way that I possibly could. Emotionally, imaginatively, I started escaping, and then I found the truly effective escape, the solution, when I discovered booze. Now, I did a little nibbling along with booze, but long before I had any serious trouble with it. But when I took my first meaningful drink in my teenage years and had that magic happen for me, something happened that was to influence my life in a direction from which it will never return. Now, I wasn't an instant alcoholic nor a born alcoholic. I might have looked like one, might have drunk like one, but I really wasn't. Yeah, what I was a miserable, torn up, chewed up young fella who found an instant relief for the problems of my life. I would have been stupid not to drink. Man, that stuff did more for me than my mind could imagine. It was the cheapest, quickest, most effective solution I've ever found in my life. Ever. And what happened to me was truly significant in my mind at the point of that first meaningful drinking experience. Psychologists refer to what happened to me as implanting. You know, they talk about the early impressions that sort of form a person, form a child, as implanting, where ideas and feelings and beliefs and attachments sort of get implanted in your mind and they don't go away. What happened to me at that first significant drinking experience was one word got branded into my mind. The word was solution. And that's exactly what booze represented for me then and always. It became the greatest solution I could possibly imagine. It never quit being a solution. It just became a lousy one, because the problems that it created were greater than the problems that it solved. For example, you know, self-centered isolation riddles our book in describing what the illness is about. I was self-centered and isolated before I ever took a drink. Alcohol resolved that problem for me, solved that problem for me very effectively. But then the same thing that solved the problem one day turned right around and became the thing that even further isolated me. What had been the key to let me out of the prison in my life became the key that locked it in. And that's what I'm talking about. That's what happened with alcohol. At one point, it was a marvelous solution, but there came a day where that was to change. And when I started drinking, man, I just took off like a runaway train and never truly looked back until I was sober in Alcoholics Anonymous. Never one time can I remember seriously dealing with the question that alcohol might be a problem in my life. Now, there were lots of times when I would be throwing up my toenails, going through DTs, the monkeys, all of that junk. There were times when I knew that things weren't working well. But every time I would wake up with that bewilderment and frustration and terror and say, for God's sakes, what's wrong with me? Never once did I say, you're drinking too much. Not once. It never quit being a solution. It just became a lousy one. And that's what happened. I just sort of hit the ground running and never looked back. And in the course of that, something happened that was definitive in my life. Somebody talked about it on one of the panels earlier this morning. In fact, the doc quoted from that place in there of what happened. Somewhere in the course of that, my drinking changed. We popularly refer to it in AA as crossing a line, where the drinking changes from what it had been to something with an entirely different character. I don't know how to explain all that stuff. I don't understand it. Our book, I think, explains it and defines it very well. Some people say our book doesn't define alcoholism. It does nothing but describe it. For my money, it defines it as perfectly as I would ever want to hear it in one line. And it defines what's significant for me to understand about alcoholism. The line is in the 3rd chapter, 3rd paragraph. It's the only thing in the book that I would confidently quote verbatim and believe it's right. I quote a lot of stuff, but most of it I just make up. It's, I mean, I know it's close, but it ain't never right. The line in there that's really a fundamental part of my whole life now, it sounds mild and innocuous. It says, we alcoholics are men and women who have lost the ability to control our drinking. And I love that definition because it tells me exactly what alcoholism is. You know, I had all the problems that we normally associate with alcoholism. Broke nose, lost cars, burned houses, woke up with strange people in strange places, woke up married to people I didn't even know. Woke, not often, but once is enough, I'll tell you that. Woke up in jail more times than I could possibly count. Screwed up everything I ever had in my life. Dirtied everybody that was dumb enough to get associated with me. And yet, I don't think those things have much to do with alcoholism. We alcoholics are men and women who have lost the ability to control our drinking. Now, when I first came in the program and I heard people describe their alcoholism and tell their stories, what it sounded to me like they were saying was, I drank and got in trouble, therefore I'm alcoholic. Not so. I'm not somebody who believes that alcoholism is defined by the problems I got into out yonder. The problems I got into out yonder were occupational hazards of drinking. I mean, my God, anybody that drank that much is going to get goofy. I mean, there ain't no way around it. I don't care if you're alcoholic or the Pope. I mean, it's just going to happen. That's not what defines it. We alcoholics are men and women who have lost the ability to control our drinking. I like that definition because it has nothing to do with demographics. It has nothing to do with whether I'm young or old. Matters not at all. It has nothing to do with whether I am black, white, brown, or any shade in between. It has nothing to do with whether I am gay or straight or switch hitter or anything else. It's got nothing to do with that. It's got nothing to do with whether I'm smart or dumb. Nothing to do with that. It's got nothing to do with, pardon me, but how much I drank. It's got not much to do with how much I drank, nor what I drank. I drank everything from champagne to hydraulic brake fluid. I preferred champagne. Hydraulic brake fluid did very little for me. But I'll tell you this, it worked, brother. I mean, that stuff locked me up tighter than a drum. And now I didn't mean to drink that. Some Yankee bootlegger sold it to me. And well, but it's not defined by that. It's not defined by how many times I got my nose broke, how many times I've been married, how many jobs I lost, how many cars I wrecked, even how many people I killed. That's not what defines alcoholism. You know, it's an interesting thing to me, and I don't mean to talk about this too long, but a little while, because I think it's pretty fundamental to my whole belief system anyway. You know, that I mentioned earlier about that it took me almost 2 years to identify with another alcoholic and said, yes, I'm like that. And now I identify with everybody. You know, that's not because of a better understanding of alcoholics, it's a better understanding of alcoholism. Because alcoholism isn't about the outward appearances. It's about a human being, this one, losing the ability to function as a human. It's about losing the ability to control my drinking or my life. And if I take one drink of anything with alcohol in it, I am dead meat. I'm dead meat. The day I crossed that line, I parted company with every other drinker in the world except other alcoholics. I am not like other drinkers, nor will I ever be. And any silly idea that I may eventually be has got, you know what the book says, it's got to be smashed. It's a heck of a good word. And so the crux of this whole thing to me is to understand that when I talk about being an alcoholic, I'm like every other alcoholic. I'm not somebody who's an alcoholic because he went to jails or penitentiaries or all those things. I'm an alcoholic because my life didn't function. My life was ruled by booze. And that's what happened. It happened in the rush of things. Best I can tell, when I was about 18 years old, doesn't really matter. When I look at my life, the best way I've ever found to definitively share it is that when I look at it, it looks like a seemingly endless series of failures and new starts. Failures and new starts. And every time I failed and started over, settled for a little less and a little less and a little less, until finally I was living a life that would have been totally unimaginable for me at one time, a life that I could not have imagined would ever happen. When I'd gotten out of the Army, I took off on a bunch of geographical stuff, wound up in the state of Michigan. I'd heard that everybody up there was rich and famous and all that, and I just sort of wandered there. It was a drunk's paradise. Worked everywhere in that city that I could before my reputation got in front of me. And then in a city of 500,000, I couldn't get a job. I'd surface once in a while, get some goofy job, and it'd just hold it for a couple of weeks or a few days or what have you, and then either forget where I worked or get fired or just wander off, one or the other. And then I finally wound up, the last year that I drank, in that city, basically living on the street. My most common address when I was indoors was a place called the Rialto Theater. And not because I like movies, it just happened to be the cheapest room in town. For 35 cents you could get in out of the cold. I never want to forget for 1 second what the nature of that existence was like. I never want to forget it. My most fervent prayer, I think, in that regard, is that I not forget, or maybe more importantly, that I not become so arrogant in my sobriety that I forget, or that I'm unwilling to share. I believe 100% what it says in the book, that our bitter experience becomes our greatest tool. And the greatest thing I've got to offer another alcoholic is the truth about my experience. That wins the trust and confidence like nothing else, eh? Never want to forget that. I never want to forget for 1 second what it was like to wander the face of this earth with no place to call home. I never want to forget about that way of life. You know, that scrambling law of the jungle junk. That today seems like a B movie. But that B movie was my life. I never want to forget that. I never want to forget what it was like to be hustling and scrambling, taken from people or they taken from me. It was just a matter of who was in the best shape to roll the other one. That was just the way it worked. Never want to forget what it was like to hustle and be demeaned by handouts from strangers, selling my life's blood, $5 a throw. Pray to my God that I never forget that for 1 second. Now, I'm absolutely confident that if I had just been left unattended, that I would have drunk myself to death. I don't have any question about that, but I'll never know. Look, it just wasn't to be the case. It would have been great if somebody had said, "Hey, guy, here's AA," and I'd gone over there and found it, or what have you. But I just had absolutely not a clue about that. And one day I woke up in jail there in Flint. No novelty to that. My God, I'd been in there more than out, it seemed, and I knew everybody that worked there, and most everybody locked up there. I mean, I was just a regular guy there. And when I woke up, I asked the guy when I could get out, and he said, "I hope never." And I didn't know what he was talking about. And then he told me that the night before, just what I said earlier, I'd been driving blind drunk down the main street of that city and had run down and killed 2 people. And now, even though I was a street character, I was not a subhuman. I was not an insensitive person by any stretch. And I'd always known I was capable of doing great harm, but like most, I never thought it would happen. Thank God. I know of very few alcoholics who haven't awakened with the panic of something like that and then breathed a sigh of relief when they found it wasn't true. I know most every alcoholic can identify and hook into that kind of thing, But you can't imagine it till it happened. And my reaction was to, I guess, very understandable. The mind's a funny thing. It'll only take in what it can handle. My reaction was just to push it away and pretend it was. I just couldn't deal with it. It then gradually accepted the truth. The only time I'd ever been in jail, didn't try to get out. And then somebody learned where I was from and who my folks were. I don't know how. But I think a police officer there, I don't know. But that's the only one I can think of that contacted my folks down in North Carolina and let me know the situation. And my mother and sister came to the Genesee County Jail and negotiated the last release they would ever have to negotiate for me from anybody's jail. It wasn't their first one, but it was to be their last one. Yeah, I think of all. I'm a busy man in Alcoholics Anonymous, and I do lots of stuff. But when I think about when my mother died, it was with a heart full of gratitude for a program that had given her a son for 29 years, of whom she was intensely proud. If I never got another single thing in Alcoholics Anonymous, that would be worth everything that I've ever done or ever will do. What a tremendous, tremendous gift. And I didn't know how to tell them when they came up that I was afraid to get out of there. I was afraid to even see people. And I walked out, knew I would never drink again, but of course I drank. My God, I stayed sober the first day, walked all day and all night, and until about noon the next day, and then of course I started drinking. From July to November of 1956, drank literally like nobody I've ever seen. I have worked with thousands and thousands of alcoholics. I've never worked with one like me. I was what they call a pathological drinker. I just gave up. I was a guy that just absolutely was clearly trying to drink himself to death. That was obvious to anybody, me or any wino on the street. But obviously that didn't happen. And then November the 19th was actually the date of what I hope and pray was my last drink. Finished a bottle of gin, went down to the court, and was sentenced to the max of 15 years. I remember that day as clearly as if it were today. I remember the very normal reaction of fear. I guess a very normal thing, because I'd been in jails all of my life. But going to Jackson Penitentiary, Jackson Prison in Jackson, Michigan, I guarantee you, is not an overnight lockup, and I knew that. Yeah, I'd hustled around on the street with guys that were in and out of there. I knew that wasn't Disneyland by any stretch of the imagination. So I had an instinctive reaction of fear, but the most real sense of relief I'd ever known. The next day I walked into that place, literally chained with 5 other guys, just like cattle that you would be taken somewhere. And I walked into that place totally resigned to my fate. I never believed I would ever come out of there, and I truly did not care. And it wasn't a callous disregard. I just wanted to disappear. I just wanted to be gone. And never believed I would ever come out. Those weren't even thoughts much that crossed my mind. It was just a body being put in storage. Mighty, mighty, sick and beaten young man. And one day, I never spoke to anybody when I was there. I just didn't have anything to say. I sat in my cell. If somebody asked me a direct question, I would answer. I never greeted anybody or asked them where they were from. Nothing. And then one day a guy called me out for an interview that worked there and talked a while, and he made the same diagnosis I'd heard all my life. That, geez, you sure drink a lot. And it had always gone on from there to well-intended but useless advice, like, why don't you stop drinking, or why don't you drink less, or don't be so crazy when you drink. And this guy observed about my drinking, and he did something I'd never heard before. He said, we have an AA group here at the institution. Think you better go. And that wasn't an order. It was just an observation. And I didn't have to go. But a few days later, I got a little, wasn't even a letter, it was just a little piece of paper about that big, Ivister, 94-153, 39, 3rd, 8. That was my entire existence. That was my identity. The Ivister 94-153 was my number, 39, 3rd, 8 was my address, and then it said, report to your first meeting, Groundhog, it didn't say Groundhog Day, that's what it was, February 2nd of 57, and I walked in. And just like I was talking about in the beginning, that I really didn't know what to expect. I didn't know what they'd do, and probably just as well. They ran the meeting much like this. They opened it with the same prayer, read the same stuff that we read here tonight, and then they introduced the speaker, a guy by the name of Shy Walker. And what a marvelous, marvelous man. Now that day I didn't walk away saying I've just met a marvelous man. I met a guy, and I'd never seen an alcoholic do that. Well, all he did was what I'm doing. He stood up and told his story. And I sat there in utter amazement. I thought, what on earth would somebody come in this penitentiary talking to 300 crazy convicts and then lay out their life like that? I mean, that made absolutely no sense to me. I'd seen a lot of alcoholics tell stories, but not their own. That guy told it, and I was absolutely startled. I mean, I didn't understand for a long time why those guys came in there and did that. Yeah, at one point I thought speakers were sort of a corporate level spokesman or something. I thought that's what they did. I thought that was their work or something. I didn't understand what they were doing. I mean, I was abysmally ignorant about this thing. And so I went. And the amazing thing to me is I stayed in there 3.5 years, and then they told me I would leave if I could leave if I would agree to go to North Carolina. And I told them I'd like to think about that. I wasn't sure I wanted to go. No, you know that's a big lie, man. Shoot. I didn't like that place the day I drove up. And after I got to talking to people, I had a few yo-yos tell me that I would get used to it. Well, apparently I didn't stay long enough. Because I'll assure you, I was less used to it the day I left than I was the day I walked in. I hated it with a purple passion. Everything about it, and I still feel very much that way today. I don't hate it with a livid rage, but I absolutely detest everything about that kind of thing that's so necessary, but such a usually demeaning experience for the people in it. So I went through that. When I left that meeting, the remarkable thing is that during that 3.5 years, I never missed a meeting. Whether it was once a week or once a day, I never missed a single meeting. And in the course of it, a brand new way of life happened for me. I told you in the beginning what I carried in. I didn't exaggerate one bit. Those were exactly a kind of a light touch of it, but those were exactly the kinds of feelings that I was having. And those were exactly the kinds of absolute mountains of guilt that permeated my life. And when I think about that, my God, what does it take to reach into a 24-year-old piece of human wreckage like that and, my God, just to give a will to live? Never mind the means, just a will to live. And then a means to do it. It takes something mighty powerful. And I'd like to share with you a bit about what I think really turned the key. I always like to talk about this a bit. Tonight, considering who we are, I'd like to lay a little extra emphasis on it in terms of things that were essential to me. And I know that you guys are committed to trying to carry an effective message to folk who can't get to the message. And for whatever it's worth, I'll share what I think was truly significant to me. The recovery group that I went into at Jackson Prison was a fine group of Alcoholics Anonymous. In all candor, it was probably a better group than 90% that I visit in this country today. And what I mean by that is that it was a well-structured, organized group that existed for the purpose of effectively carrying the message to alcoholics. It did as good a job as I've ever seen of helping new people learn what the design for living is that we call Alcoholics Anonymous. Did a fine job of that. I'll always be grateful. And it wasn't done by Rhodes Scholars. It was done by guys in the joint just like me. The only difference is that they were a bit in front. And then what they did is turn and share it with the guy behind them. Powerful stuff. I'll always be grateful for that well-ordered, structured group that set about doing what it said it was going to do. One thing with a drunk like me, I'd heard language all of my life and none of it ever had any meaning. A drunk like me believes what he sees. And what I saw in the recovery group of Alcoholics Anonymous was a group that did what it said. We didn't just get together and do something wonderful. We did a very purposeful kind of thing that was well thought out and planfully delivered. I'll always be grateful for that. Some of the finest meetings, most important meetings that I've ever attended in my life were in relation to that group. Some of the best ones were times when 6 or 8 of us would pull up a tree out on the yard and just sit around and share like men seldom do. I guarantee you, if you're ever going to get down to cases, you're going to do it there. Because that's one place where the warts show and you ain't got no place to hide. So the shucking and jiving tends to go away. And that was some of the most important, vital stuff that's ever happened to get me fundamentally grounded in the new way of life that's represented here and what it takes to bring it about. I'll always be grateful for that. The other thing that God is so much. This is not a marathon of endurance. You know, it's not a tough guy program. This is essentially a program of the heart. That's what it's about. It's about a spiritual transaction between people. It's not just a legion of the damned banding together. That's part. We look that way sometimes, but it's more than that, isn't it? And when I think back to what it was that really turned the corner, what was it that sort of gave me the desire to go, the worth to go? I think about the people just like you guys that walked into those institutions. It was all men back then. But I think about those guys, and I know them well. As a matter of fact, the end of this month, I'll be up in Montreal. We'll be doing a full day, little session with one of the guys that carried the message to me. He spoke at either my fourth or fifth meeting. And to what a dream come true. He and I will be in Montreal, and we'll be sharing together. What a great day for him and for me. What a great thing. He was the first guy that ever put words to the emotional roller coaster that early recovery entails. He was the first guy I ever heard put definitive language to that. And he's a great fellow. You've probably read some of his writings. He's the guy that wrote, what do they call it, New Wine. You know, the thing that's a collection of articles. He's a great writer. That's what he did for a living. And, well, anyway. I'll always be grateful to those guys who walked into that prison. All kinds of guys. Now, just like Mel, the guy I'm talking about, I don't know if Mel ever been in jail in his life. Doesn't really matter. He'd been in the prison of alcoholism. And that's the only common denominator I've ever needed. I'll always be grateful for those guys who walked into that institution and did what they did. Well, all they did was come in and share about their lives. And what a tremendous experience to just vicariously join in and be part of their lives. I'll always be grateful for that. I'll always be grateful for the people who came into that institution and shared sincerely from their hearts. I'll always be grateful for the people who reached out the right hand of fellowship to me. And not a single one ever asked me one question about who I was, what my background was, what my resume was, what my aspirations were. None of that. People who accepted me not just at the level of what I was, but accepted me at the level of what I could become. A convict in a maximum custody penitentiary. I was treated and greeted and respected like a gentleman long before I ever became one. Yeah, I'm not one who believes in the haircut sessions and in berating people and all kinds of little off-the-wall cliches. I'm not one who believes in that. Yeah, I'm one who believes that if an alcoholic will sincerely share his experience, strength, and hope with another and connect with that person on a spiritual level, that's the most powerful we ever are. And I'll always be. Let me just see if I can illustrate it just this way. But I think it is the heart and soul. You know, Jackson Prison, I won't give you an architecture lesson, but I think prisons are built by fiendish architects. They just build them strange. Back in the old days, you used to build them with cells, and you'd sit there and look at each other across this vast space day in and day out. And Jackson is a 54-acre establishment. It's built so that the buildings are part of the design, and then you got a wall 40 feet wide, tall. And now I understand this. I understand this. But when they did tours of that place, that was not a nice place. It was not a nice institution. Believe me, I know. They had 6,000 people in there, to use the term loosely. They had some of the finest people I've ever met in my life. Some of them are my dear friends to this day. But there was also a liberal number of the sorriest excuses for human beings that ever lived. And so I understood why they did things like they did. When they did tours there, they used to bring them in, and well, I don't know about the West Coast, but out on the East Coast, when the Yankees are all going to Florida, you know, people do anything to make a buck. And they have a thing there that they call serpatoriums. And I don't know why we'll do it, but what they do is take a bunch of snakes and they put them down in this pit of a thing, and it just look like a can of fishing worms or something. There's those snakes in there writhing around. I paid $1 to go look at them. And I don't even like snakes. And I go in there and look at those suckers and shudder, and then go in the next one. I mean, it's weird. I don't know why we do stuff like that. Well, every time I've ever looked at one of those goofy things, I remember the tours at Jackson Prison. Because that's how they did tours. They would take the people who wanted to tour the place for whatever reason, and they would walk them around the tops of the buildings. And they could look down at the snakes, that. Now, I understood it. But I guarantee you understanding doesn't change the way it makes you feel. I remember that. One of the things that I think was so powerful about the connection with members of Alcoholics Anonymous was that members of Alcoholics Anonymous didn't speak from the tops of the buildings. Members of Alcoholics Anonymous walked right into the middle of it. And I guarantee you they couldn't have... I know this now. Some of them act like they didn't know it, but those guys couldn't have been safer in their mother's arms. Anybody would have tried to hurt one of those guys would have been in one heap of deep hurt. And that's a fact. Yeah. Anyway, that's a kind of a dramatic way to state it, but I think that's the point. Yeah, that's the point. When we reach out to folk who don't expect anybody to care, it doubles the meaning. It doubles the value. And that's why I think it's so doggone important when we go in there to conduct ourselves in that way, so that we carry ourselves in a way that represents some hope and the fact that there is a life of dignity and meaning and purpose out here. That was instrumental for me, very much so. I will also be grateful forever that those early people in my life pushed me into action. We were talking about it earlier today, about the vital importance of action. I'm a great believer in the book. I'm a great believer in working intensively with people in the book. I just finished going through with a group for 1 year, where we did the program of recovery as the way it's laid out in the book. So I believe in that. But I believe even more fundamentally in the magic of action. And if I had to make a choice between getting a new person into action or into the book, I guarantee action would be my way. Because there's nothing that more quickly gets rid of the barriers and gives you that sense of belonging that's so vital. And I'll always be grateful for the people who push me into action. I'll just say it this way, and then move on to the other thing I want to talk about. I was a pretty beat up guy, as you might have gathered. I was not a gregarious soul. I wasn't somebody who could actively get into the stuff and be public and vocal about anything. I was a mighty withdrawn young fellow. I'll always be grateful for the people who weren't stopped by that, who gently, patiently, lovingly, but assertively walked me out of that. Sometimes I forget about how desperate my condition was and about how lovingly patient people were in helping me walk through it. I was somebody who didn't know there were options. I marvel today at people who exercise options about whether they're going to get involved in something. I never got told that there were options. I mean, when I got in the program, folks just said, come on, this is what we do. I didn't know there was an alternative. I might have gone into limbo early on. But thank God I got pulled. And I got active. And I've been active ever since. The first time I ever talked in Alcoholics Anonymous, I did it in a complete blackout. That's a fact. Now here it is. I've been active for almost 40 years. And in this course of time, I have never said no to any sincere request for service in Alcoholics Anonymous. Debbie asked me tonight if I was nervous. I said, yeah. Because my first sponsor told me the first time I ever got up here and wasn't nervous, I ought to sit down. Because what we're about is an important human transaction, isn't it? It's about sharing our lives. Not one time in the past 40 years have I ever said yes with total comfort. Not one time have I ever said, yeah, you got the right guy, I'm the guy for that. Every time I have ever said yes, I've had to step through a little curtain of fear. Little curtain of fear. And every time I have stepped through that little curtain of fear, what this program's given me is the growth, the freedom that's let me be a functioning human being. So now I don't talk in blackouts anymore, but there's always that little bit of anxiety that's there. But for God's sakes, if you're going through that, don't let it stop you. Step through that thing. A guy named Emerson, I believe, said, do the thing you fear to do and the death of fear is certain. I can tell you that's true, but I can also tell you that it's a slow process. It doesn't die overnight. Tremendously important. So that's what I got pushed into in that penitentiary. I got turned on to living. I came alive again for the first time and got busy with the business of living. Somebody invented television while I was drunk. Didn't even know we had it. And they had Michigan State University started a campus program on television down there. And I enrolled as a freshman at Michigan State University while I was still in maximum custody joint. Finished 2 years of my college education in there. That's what happens a lot of times with most alcoholics. You don't have to say giddy up to alcoholics. You know, all you got to do is just sort of let them see the opening, and then bang, gone. And that's exactly what happened to me, man. I just took off, and I came alive. I became a functioning member of Alcoholics Anonymous, and this program worked for me as magnificently in that institution as anywhere I've ever been in my life, and maybe more, because it made me a free man. In the ways that mattered most. I was physically still confined, but I was a free man in the ways that mattered most. And then when I got out, it was just a matter of keeping on. 42 months, they said, you can go. And I'm somebody who I told you I didn't like that place. A fellow told me when I first got in there that in order to get out, you had to have a job. I had a job lined up more than 3 years before I even had any possible chance of getting out. I'd seen some dummies sit there and then start trying to find a job when they said you can go. And I said, well, if anybody's waiting, I don't want them to be waiting on me. I'll wait on them. So I was ready. I also had an AA contact lined up. I knew that I was going to stay in this thing. And I didn't know if people in Alcoholics Anonymous were really interested in guys like me. It's just one of those natural things. I knew the guys that came in there really were genuine in what they were doing, but I always wondered about the folks that didn't come. And so I wanted to be sure and touch the bases. So about a year before I got out, somebody got hold of a world directory, and I looked up my town where I went when I got out. They had two groups listed. One of them had 35 members, the other one 25, and the other one had 15. And so I naturally wrote to the bigger one. I figured it'd be the best. And let's see now. I think that was about 38 years ago that I wrote that letter. And I know the postal office is slow, but come on now, guys. It ain't that slow. I'm still waiting for an answer. What I found out was that everything that calls itself an AA group ain't. Unfortunately, some of them quit being AA groups, but they keep meeting. And they just no longer serve a function. And just sad but true. And I saw why when I got down there and had a chance to start Alcoholics Anonymous in that town. But the second time I wrote to this smaller group, and this time I got a letter back that couldn't have been better if I had told somebody to just fill my dreams. I couldn't have asked for better. And when I'd written the letter, I just said, I'm a guy from North Carolina that's in prison in Michigan. I'm coming back. I want to know if it'll be okay if I come to your group. That's all. I didn't want a job or a ride or anything, or a girlfriend. I just wanted to, is it okay if I come? And I got a letter back quicker than the mail could run, I thought, from a guy who became my second sponsor. And he told me, in the same spirit that I wrote, he wrote a full page, a type page letter describing the group and the functions and what they did with the intergroups and the eating meetings and stuff like that. And then he put one line in there that might have been a throwaway for him. But he put one in there that said, you'll be welcome here. We want you. We need you. Well, I think this group knows. You can imagine what that means to a guy in a maximum joint. Wondering if he can even be accepted by somebody, tolerated by somebody We want you and we need you. If you don't think that letter is important, sometime when you're at my house, I'll be glad to show it to you. Still got that sucker, I tell you. Well, and of course I knew I was home, and then when I got out, it was just a matter of keeping on and whacking away. And I hit the ground running, man. The first year I was out, I was like a young goat. I lost 25 pounds the first year I was out. Got immediately active in this thing. I want to just sort of, I want to talk about two things in wrapping up. One, people chew me out if I don't tell this part, and sometimes I do have mixed feelings because I'm somebody for whom many dreams have come true and some that I wouldn't have dared dream. And when I left that joint, the only thing I wanted to do was just take my place in the world and have a way to make just a decent, honest living and to be accepted as a part of a community. That's all I wanted. They're just simple dreams. And I'm here to tell you that they do come true. When I hit the ground, I got a job working in a mill, a lousy job, sweeping the floor on the night shift, third shift in that mill. And I was the happiest floor sweeper you've ever seen in your life. And deeply grateful because it sure beat cutting those convicts' hair at Jackson. I loved that thing. I was dangerous. I was so fast with those things, man. I was just all over that place, sweeping that floor. Got immediately active in the group. My group sponsored a small prison. And 2 weeks after I was out, the guy said, come on, go with us. I said, you mean I can go over there? And they said, yeah, shoot, come on. And so I went over 2 weeks after I was out. That's where I made my first talk. Typical AA style. The inmate chairman, there were three of us sitting there. The inmate chairman turned around and said, who's speaking? I didn't know. They did. One of them got me by each elbow and said, he is. And I swear to God, I did speak in a total blackout. I absolutely ain't quit since. It's something. And 2 months after I was out, I was made outside sponsor of that group. And I couldn't have been more honored and affirmed if I'd been elected governor of the state. A tremendous, tremendous feeling of that. And I gave it everything I had. About the same time, my pro supervisor came to me one day and he said, Tom, you're real active in this AA thing. And it worried me because I thought he was going to tell me to slow down, and I knew I wouldn't. And he said, wouldn't it help you if you could drive? And I said, yes, sir, but I can't, like he didn't know. And when I'd left the prison, in letters that big, said, this man's never drink alcoholic beverages, this man's never drive a motor vehicle. And I accepted that as definitive facts of life, that was to be the case. He said, let me check on it. A couple weeks later, got a phone call and asked me to meet him at the Sears store uptown. And that really sounds like Mayberry in a way. He said to meet him at Sears, and this story's true in every detail. I walked up to the Sears store. I could see through the window to the back of the store, and my parole guy was standing there with the fellow that turned out to be the licensed agent. And I walked up to him, and he introduced me, chatted a minute, and the guy handed me a driver's license. He didn't even ask me if I could drive. I mean, nothing. I didn't take a test, written, verbal, nothing. Didn't even pay for it. I don't know who paid for it. Maybe nobody. Now, you know that ain't legal. I mean, there ain't no way you can do that. But I've been driving ever since. I tell you what, I've had some people tell me I must have been politically connected. Oh, yeah. Yeah, the sheriff of that county used to lock me up on a regular basis. Real connection. Yeah. I'll tell you what it was. Yeah, I'm a great believer in miracles, but I'm not one of those miracles behind every bush guys, and I'm not talking about the throw down your crutches thing. Yeah, I'm a very practical, pragmatic sort of guy about these things. I'm a deeply spiritual man, and I do believe in miracles, but I believe in them in a very, very down-to-earth kind of way. I'm a practitioner. What it says in the book, I think, that it's okay to have our heads in the clouds as long as our feet are solidly on the ground. And so when I talk about miracles, I'm not talking about startling mystical things. I'm talking about the point where preparation and opportunity come together. That's a miracle to me. When a farmer digs the soil and plants the bean and the bean grows, that's the miracle. The miracle is the growth. And when a drunk presents himself and a license comes back, that's a miracle. If I had tried to scheme that into happening, I guarantee you I'd be walking today. What I truly believe, without any question, not just based on my experience, but based on the experience of God knows how many people. When we give our lives to this program and God's got work for us to do, the walls come down. And I don't care what the walls are. I've seen that God knows how many times. And I've had things happen that defy imagination. And the standard characteristic is most of the good things that have happened to me I had little to do with. They just came. It's been a strange thing for me in Alcoholics Anonymous. Not only that, but I've never knowingly solved a problem in Alcoholics Anonymous. For 40 years. I mean, this is a slow-working sucker. I can't remember one time when I have sat in a meeting and said, by golly, that's it. Not once. I don't know that I've ever solved a defective character. I don't know that I've ever done any of that. We talk about this as a journey. What my experience has been is that as I go along this process of recovery, one day I look around for the problem and it ain't there. It's a process and the things happen. And that's the same way with the miracles. 5 months after I was out, I was elected DCM. Now that's not something most people turn cartwheels over, but I guarantee you I did. I did. 5 months earlier, I had wondered if I would ever have one friend. If there was one person that would ever trust me to do anything. And that's not maudlin stuff. I mean, that's just a fact. I truly wondered. And here I was, the people in 12 cities asking me to be their trusted servant. Tremendously. 2 years after I was out, got a call one day from the state capitol. Guy had visited the AA group I sponsored one time. And he asked for Mr. Ivers. I got on the phone and he said, Mr. Ivers, now this wasn't done back then. It's not all that unusual now, but he said, Mr. Ivers, we're thinking of expanding the rehabilitation program in our prison system. And we were wondering if you would consider accepting a position. And first thing I said to him was, are you sure you know who you're talking to? And he said, yeah, we've checked you out. We probably know you better than you know yourself. Now, they'd never hired an ex-con in history to do anything like that, and I knew they weren't going to start with me. But they did. And, when he asked me that, I told him up here intellectually just exactly what I meant. God, I'd rather do that than anything I know. It had never occurred to me. I'd rather do that than anything I know. And down here, you know what I said on the inside. There ain't no way. But sure enough, I was employed as a supervisor in the rehabilitation program in the prison system in North Carolina. And it was an absolute ball. I absolutely loved it. And I have got to count this up sometime. I think it was somewhere around 8 or 9 years, something like that. But I just didn't take time to count. I didn't take a vacation for 9 years. My whole life was an absolute blast, man. I couldn't believe it. And I was having a great time. And then one day, the head of our system, the director of our system, called me in and he said, Tom, I'd like for you to take an assignment for me. And I said, yes, sir. Now, normally what that meant was go talk to the Rotary Club or do something, or write a paper or something. And I said, yes, sir. And what? And he said, I would like for you to take over an institution as warden. And I swear to God, that still to this day sounds absolutely bizarre to me. It just doesn't fit, you know. And when I got up off the floor, I said, well, boss, I don't know if I want to do that or not. Can I have some time to think? He gave me 5 minutes. And I took the 5 minutes. I went out and paced up down the hall, went to the John like I always do. Not that I had to, Barbara. Barbara was wondering if she'd make it through the meeting. You're doing good, honey. I know she got her legs crossed, so I got to quit pretty quick. And I went in and did my praying and came back and I said, okay, I'll do it. And I did have mixed feelings. I didn't want to be a keeper. Yeah, I didn't want to be the man. I love mud wrestling with the guys. I didn't want to be the man. But then I recognized that perhaps with some authority I could address some of the issues like I heard talked about in the panel here today. That just maybe I could make a difference. And so I did. That's what I did for the next 20 years or so was I basically developed new institutions. That's what I did. It was my specialty and had a marvelous experience. It's the kind of experience that's unique and obviously had great meaning to me. And I was able to make some contribution. No false modesty about that. I feel real good about that career. I tell you what I feel best about of all. Of all the people I've ever worked with, even in that capacity, I don't know of a single person, staff or inmate, that I've had to deal with in some difficult ways that I couldn't comfortably meet in an alley. That's the greatest legacy I could imagine for a guy in that kind of work. Now, obviously I didn't just fall out of a maximum custody cell into the warden's office. That's a fairly unlikely story, isn't it? Of all the dreams I had, I will assure you that one never made the list. One of these days I'm going to get out here and run this sucker. I'll show. Yeah. Well, when I talk about miracles being a product of preparation and opportunity, I did bother to finish my college and my education in correctional administration, which helps a little. It doesn't make you a hell of a lot better, but I mean, it just makes you look better. And I learned to spell a few words, that it wasn't hay. And I did bother to outwork anybody I ever met. Other than that, it was a truly unbelievable miracle. Those kinds of things are what helped me to find that spot in my profession. But I'll assure you that the thing that gave me the willingness and the ability and the capability of being a decent leader in that organization is exactly what we're doing right here. You can believe that. If it weren't for this program, none of that would have ever happened to begin with, nor would I have been able to function in the style that was important for me to function. I'll always be grateful. I'm still in the system. I'm doing a different job now. I'm doing what they do with old guys. I'm in the head shed, and they pull me out and dust me off every once in a while. No, that's not exactly true. I'm doing the most exciting, invigorating stuff I've ever done in my career. And just like Alcoholics Anonymous, I'm more excited now than I was when I started. And so I'll retire someday if I can ever get to a point that I can just find a stopping place. It just didn't come yet. So that's still a very, very important part of my life. Basically, who I am, and this is, I guess, what I'd like to kind of close up on. It's a matter. This program isn't about what my profession is. Certainly, that's personally important. But what's truly important is who I am as a person. Yeah, I'm a member of Alcoholics Anonymous in good standing. I'm an active member of Alcoholics Anonymous. I didn't used to be. I still am. Yeah, I'm somebody who has been enormously blessed with as fine and as satisfying an experience in Alcoholics Anonymous as a man could have. I'm the busiest man I know in this program, except maybe David. David is wide open. One of David's great lines of profound philosophy is man who stands around with mouth open, waiting for roast duck to fly into his mouth will have a long wait. That's the way I look at the business of living, Dave. Thank you for that great philosophy. I'm an average guy. I live in that little old town of Aberdeen, North Carolina. That's where my real dreams have come true, the ones that I dared to dream. I'm just a regular guy. I live in the smallest place I've ever lived. I'm a citizen of that town. Now, that don't mean much to folks that have always been citizens of towns. But if you've ever been a person who wandered the face of this earth with no place that you could really call home, you know what that means? I'm a citizen. I don't wander the face of this earth alone anymore. I wander the face of this earth, but today I function fully everywhere that I go. But that's my place. That's my place. I live there. I'm a citizen, and I'm a good citizen, conscientious citizen. My subdivision was annexed by Aberdeen. I live right between Aberdeen and Southern Pines, and I was annexed by Aberdeen. I was the only guy in my neighborhood that didn't sign a petition to resist annexation. And I didn't bother to explain to anybody why I didn't. I'm tired of being out. I want to be in. I want to be in. So I'm a citizen. I'm a husband. I fell in love when I was absolutely committed that I would never marry again. Done it once drunk, once sober. I figured that's the only ways I know to do it, so I ain't going to do it no more. Then I met a little girl up in Saskatchewan. I couldn't even pronounce that thing a few years ago. I was up there at an AA conference, and the guy that's my sponsor now introduced me to this little gal. She's not in the fellowship. But I got smitten big time. I fell in love with that little foreigner and something else. Us Southerners do talk slow. Some people think we think slow, too. They usually rue that thought, but that's, I don't know how in the world, it had nothing to do with me really, but that girl, when I met her, I was up there, she was working for the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. Not a Mountie, but she worked in the office of that, and just on the basis of a quick meeting and whatever she felt from this, she left everything that she owned and moved to North Carolina. Everything she owned. Without even any promise of anything with me. And for 3 years we courted. Didn't live together. We courted. And we lived several blocks apart. And I fell deeply in love with that little girl. I came to a point, I had always wondered, I had never been able to make a full commitment to another human being. I mean, this way, of a loving thing. I'd been involved with lots and lots of folk, but I had never been fully committed to another human. I never knew the experience of deeply, deeply coming to love somebody and learning that love's not something you fall in or find or discover or get. Love is a discipline. Love is caring and actively caring for another human. The most beautiful feeling I think I ever had in my life was when I got to that point and knew that I loved that little girl and wanted to be her husband. And when I asked her to marry me, it was not to be my wife. It was to let me be her husband. The most beautiful feeling I've ever had. What a great thing. We're coming up on 29 years of continuous marriage. I still can't believe that this July, and I'm deeply grateful for that. We're as thoroughly married today as we've ever been. And I meant what I said earlier, that I am a married man. I'm a married man. I go all over this continent, and that girl trusts me. She trusts me. And she trusts me because I'm trustworthy. Great thing. It's a great feeling. Now, if the guys in the joint had ever told me about this element of my life coming into fruition, there ain't no way I'd have believed that. But I wouldn't take anything for it today. I have a couple of kids just like yours. They're great, and I've been truly blessed with. Our kids grew up. They were just goofy, acting like most are for a certain time. I didn't know what was going to happen to them. I thought my daughter was going to wind up in outer space or something. She was really something. But they both settled down and graduated from our university system. And my daughter majored in psychology over my advice. And today she's working with developmentally disabled people and young fellows with Down syndrome, and I'm enormously proud of her. Great girl. And my son screwed around, and I thought he was going to major in fraternity for 4 years, is what it seemed like at first, but then he settled down and decided to go into medicine. And he graduated from medical school last year, I believe, and he's now doing his residency up in Delaware, and yeah, I'm intensely proud of that boy. He's in the only specialty that I advised him not to get into is OBGYN. I told him he better get him a law degree while he was at it, but he's just delivering those little Yankee babies by the dozens. Great fella. They did a big hootenanny for me at my 40th, and he came down to be there. And I tell you, I wouldn't take $1 million for what he said at that dinner when he talked about the influence of growing up in a home where recovery lives and how it shaped his life in the direction he chose to go. And that's the thing I'd like to just close up on particularly here. I've had this on my mind lately for a bit, and I've talked about it a lot, but I want to share it particularly with this group because of who you are. Yeah, I know that there are people in here who go the extra mile. I've heard guys over this weekend talking about driving 200 miles to keep a commitment and sometimes being turned away. You know, I know this is not a parlor game group. This is a group that puts it on the line. And let me just share this with you because it's important to me and maybe to you. I've always worried because I've always been an active member. And as you gathered, when you've got a heart to serve and you're willing to serve and you don't say no, you're going to get an awful lot of opportunities to serve. You can believe that. And so I've been very busy for the last 40 years. I'm the busiest guy I know. And sometimes, particularly as my family came along, I've always had those nagging fears of what's the price tag on this? Am I being just as irresponsible in my recovery as I was in my drinking? Because I'll tell you, you can talk about quality time all you want to, but just plain old time is awfully important. See, every time I get on a plane and fly away on the weekend, I go with a warm and loving crowd, and sure, it gets old sometimes dragging suitcases through the airport. Of course it does. But it's an absolute joy to participate and get the great feeling that you get in these kind of things. I'm no hero for doing this kind of stuff, not by any stretch of the imagination. If there's any hero, it's that little gal that handles the total responsibility every time I leave, because the responsibility, the responsibility settled squarely on her. And if I didn't have the strong, participating support of that little girl in my life and my children in that, I guarantee you I couldn't do it without a major cost. So I've always wondered what the price is, and is there a price? Am I going to wind up with kids who feel just as deserted from an AA father as they would from a drunk father? And I'll tell you what I've absolutely come to believe because I've been convinced. And it's this. Now, notice the words. If I am sincerely trying to carry out God's will for me, and I am sincerely trying to serve, I'm not talking about frantic activity for the purpose of diversion. I'm talking about if I am sincerely trying to do God's will and serve. I can tell you in absolute certain terms that there ain't no harm coming. Because I've been doing this for 40 years, and if it has ever hurt me in any way, I don't know it. I am stronger and better and more respected and more solidly in place in every area of my life than I would otherwise be, I believe. I'm better off socially, financially, maritally, parentally, professionally. There isn't one single area of my life that's not been brought alive and enhanced in every possible way. So I'm a guy that has found a brand new way to live. And the day I walked into Alcoholics Anonymous, I started the greatest adventure I could ever imagine. And the key to the whole deal is in giving my heart, giving my broken and wasted body to this program, giving my heart to it and letting service open the key to a brand new way of life. I am honored to be with you guys.